Hey folks, Steve here with another Korea Fire and Ice video. In this video, we'll be aiming to maybe get through turn 6 and 7, or even more, depending on how quickly I move in the game, and what I choose to record or not record. As a basic check-in, we've obviously are now a decent chunk into the game. We're experiencing what the game has to offer. And I've shown a lot of things in detail on camera and how attacks are conducted and the different mechanics. But I'm going to start to move a lot more quickly and only show the end result of actions. And that may mean there's just a whole lot fewer videos overall because we're going to move so quickly. But if there's anyone out there who wants me to slow back down, or they're really interested in seeing more of the mechanics displayed in granular detail, let me know in the comment section below. But I'm going to hit the gas a little bit just so that we can keep churning through the game. Now, before we get into the monthly phase of the turn, and I've already done a lot of the monthly phase ahead of recording this so that we can move quickly, I did want to spend another few minutes talking about the objective marker mechanics of the game. Because I feel like there's just so much wrapped in to like what is that system trying to achieve, and why do we care one way or the other how that system works. And of course, the whole purpose of my video series, as someone kindly pointed out in the comment section, is that I do poke and prod at systems. I really try to understand it. I think there's a whole video worth doing about systems and simulation and the purpose of systems and systems thinking and all of that maybe someday. But because the victory point system and objectives, they're really tied to one another, are kind of important to any game that you're going to play. It, to me, seems really important to really focus in on this, right? I mean, you play any war game, there's going to be some measure of determining victory. And if there are mechanics around how to get victory points and the way that those are determined and mechanically executed, that tends to be really important to the overall game design, right? If you're playing the game, you want to win, so you get victory points. How do you do that? And if there's ever sort of dissonance between what you want to be doing as a player and getting victory points, then that will tend to bother people. So anyway, lots of preamble. Let's talk about the objective markers again. So up till this point, the game has been super dynamic and filled with surprise, right? The North Koreans invaded across the parallel, have invaded South Korea. We've seen a lack of front lines up until right about now, where the North Korean forces were kind of descending, coming through, taking areas, doing so relatively quickly, except around Seoul, where we kind of got gummed up in the works a little bit. But then it was, running down here. Now, at the beginning of the game, several objective markers were placed in certain areas, in particularly cities of importance. And the North Koreans managed to take some of that territory where those objectives, belonged or existed, or what have you. And the important thing was that we not only capture the territory with the objectives, but that we then, during victory phases, once per turn, chose to either add another objective marker or revealed objective marker so that they could be claimed later. You can claim one objective at a time. Otherwise, you're revealing them, and you can reveal multiple at a time, it looks like, based on the wording of the rules. And you can place one at a time, but there's that opportunity cost. If you placed one, you can't claim one. If you claimed one, you can't place one. And at some point, you got to reveal these things so you can actually claim them in the first place. So there's a little bit of a life cycle. If the objective marker wasn't there for you at the beginning of the game, you have to place it, reveal it, and claim it. And that is basically meaning a bare minimum of 3 turns to get victory points via that method. Now, there are other ways to get victory points. North Koreans can get victory points for forcing UN forces to bug out. They can, both sides can get victory points in combat if the opponent wants to give up victory points. And they even have an incentive to do that, to manipulate the foreign aid perspective, which is not a bad thing, but it is something that is a bit of an oddity in terms of just how are you working your overall war effort, right? And then you can get some victory points for MiG Alley, and there might be a couple others that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But But the objective markers are certainly a source for those victory points. Now, what I think I'm having trouble with is the way the verbiage is set up currently. Well, even in the original rules and the 3.0 rules on where can you put an objective and what does that actually result in terms of the game mechanics. So let me use the real example of the game that we had. Uh, During the game, we had some starting objectives in areas like Tegu and uh, I think it was Tejan, maybe, I think at the very beginning. And basically, the UN player had a choice, right? They could decide, do they want to place an objective marker on their own? And they didn't really have very many places that they could do that, but they could have. They could have chosen to put some in Pyongyang at the beginning. They're doing that now in this game, but they first were focused on removing objective markers. And that required them having a unit in a space, occupying it, and choosing, hey, for my action, I'm going to remove this marker of yours that I have a guy on top of. What does that represent in terms of simulation? Is that saying by putting my guys here and holding it across a turn, because we kept the North Koreans from taking it within a turn, we have earned the right to deprive the North Koreans of victory points? That makes sense to me, right? That makes sense, right? If an objective marker is down, in some ways that puts a timer on it. That is a real objective. You need to get it. If you fail, you lose out on that opportunity for the victory points. That can kind of make sense, right? I'm driving with that. That's all right. I think where I'm really getting tripped up, and what my big question ultimately is on this is, why does it require an enemy unit to place an objective? And I suspect that there's some balance thing where, like, if you could put them in places where there were not units, that would allow you to somehow manipulate the system too much. But the game already allows you to do that, right? And we are seeing it in this game where the North Koreans can place objective markers in the unoccupied hex of Seoul over here that still has not been entered by the communist forces. There does not need to be a unit there. There's an HQ there, but that doesn't even matter for our purposes. It can be empty, and we can place markers there. So, what's the point in that? Why are we doing that? And why is it that we can't place an objective on empty places elsewhere? I think the requirement that it should be enemy controlled makes sense, but I still don't quite get why it necessarily requires a unit there. What's the barrier? Now, when we actually get into the rest of the next couple of turns, some of this weird problem of, like, how do you do objective markers will start to go away, I think, because if we look at the board position, there is now a clear front line, and it runs right now basically here, and it's going to collapse northward as we get back to Seoul. So what happens when we have a clear front line? Okay, so really it's going to be who's being pushed back and who's fighting where. So imagine instead for a moment that the front line gets pushed back to, like, this part of the coast, this town, Taejon, and these towns over here. Now, if the UN player says, hey, you know what, we're awfully close to Taejon, I want to make that an important place, we're gonna put this in the papers. If we take it, we're gonna make a big deal about an offensive to take Taejon. So then we put a blue objective marker on it as the UN player. Now, right now, the rules would require that a communist unit has to be there, and there are good reasons to sit in towns and cities. They're good defensive terrain, and they tend to be hubs for the roadway. So it's a lot easier to go through Taejon than to try to wrap around, and go this way. You want to use that as the shortcut. So there are obvious reasons to put a unit there, but if I can't put one there anyway, then that's a problem. So the UN player right now couldn't put one in that city. But now let's say we had a very successful turn before we get to the end of turn 6, and we've already captured Taejon, and we're past it. Well, okay, now we can't place an objective marker there, even if we had wanted to. So then we're going to look and say, well, where else can we put an objective marker? Now, now that the game is reaching a point where front lines are going to be somewhat cohesive, it will be very difficult, I guess, to find a town that won't have some communist unit in it. We could probably find one somewhere and place a victory point, or an objective marker, which will give us victory points if we can get it. So in some ways, it's like, yeah, I think it makes sense. I think the original purpose of the system is clear. These objective markers are meant to be, uh, ordinarily, if you look at towns and cities, short-term to medium-term goals for your offensives to capture. Not just pushing the enemy back, but to have concrete, specific objectives to achieve during the game. And it makes sense, short and medium, where your long-term goals of capturing the capitals like Seoul and Pyongyang, those make sense that you can put objective markers in all the time because they are just important. And if that's your big thing, you're going to say, I'm putting all my eggs in the Seoul basket, I guess, then yeah, sure, that can make sense. But again, it leads to this weird thing that I'm doing up here. Again, feels weird. I don't think it makes sense. I can't think of a good reason why I'm allowed to do that, like in a design intent way. But I'm able to do it, so I'm going to do it, and I think it benefits me because it's a freebie, right? As the North Koreans, I did not, put more objectives down here when it's much safer and easier to put them right there where I can claim them very easily. Um, so that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like the intent makes sense, right? Short, medium, long-term objectives for you to achieve militarily that will be worth some variable amount of victory points when you achieve it. That much makes sense. I get that. And when we have our front line moving and stabilizing in certain areas, it will be easier from a player standpoint to say, ooh, I'm going to grab some victory points over there. I'm going to grab some victory points over here. And right now, what the UN player is doing is they've banked some objectives in Pyongyang, with the intent that, well, hey, if the communist player doesn't spend their limited actions removing those objective markers, when the UN gets up to Pyongyang, they're going to be able to get victory points from that, assuming they can hold it long enough, right? There is an intent there. It makes sense, right? We're saying Pyongyang's important, but it isn't totally clear. What does it mean for the opponent to remove your objective markers by having a unit there and spending their activity to get rid of it? You need some limit on, like, you can't put an infinite amount of objective markers if you never get them or whatever. So I don't know. I see the purpose, but mechanically, getting it to feel right is hard. Once the UN player had removed the objectives down here, I mean, I never felt any reason to come down to this part of the country. Like, there's a city, Gwangju, down here. Communists didn't even bother going for it. Why? Right? There weren't any UN forces there, so I can't put an objective marker. And if there's no objective marker and I don't need to go down there, I'm not going to go down there. But you would think it might be useful for the North Koreans to capture that city, or to say that they captured that city in the news and get some victory points for achieving an objective, but I couldn't because there was nothing there. If we had the ability to place an objective marker in a city without a unit and maybe only put them in towns with a unit, that would make more sense. But that would be an additional point of errata that would need to be included. Or this will be something, I guess, I'm going to propose as a rule change to Adam. And Adam, if you're watching, it's something to think about. Make it so that you can put objective markers in enemy-controlled cities with or without units, but keep it so that you need enemy units in towns, because towns are less significant holistically. But yeah, if there are enemy units there, you want to bloody them. That makes sense. Cities should be important regardless of if there are enemy units in there or not. So somehow I think my personal issues with the objective marker system could maybe be hammered out some way. I'm not asking the whole game change for me, but as you've probably heard in the other videos that I've made up to this point, it is something that draws my attention as I'm playing through. besides that, and I don't want folks to get the wrong impression, I really like everything else going on. I think the movement and the attacking, while it is very different from other games and is not in my comfort zone, um, is still interesting, and it forces certain considerations about where and how you attack without worrying about combat factors necessarily. You're worried about support levels, so I guess you're still number crunching, but it's different number crunching. Um, and I like the overall mechanics of the game through the air system and everything else. So as now that I'm 15 freaking minutes into this thing, again, the basic mechanics of the game, fighting, operational stuff, air stuff, that all seems pretty good. I like everything going on there, and I just need to finish figuring out what this objective marker system really means to the game as I'm going. So okay, that's a super long intro. But again, I thought very important to point this out. Um, if it was harder to get rid of an opponent's objective markers, maybe that would change the system. If you could place objective markers in enemy-controlled cities without units, that would change the system. And of course, any change to the system could create, a hurricane where there's a butterfly, flapping its wings. That kind of thing can happen. But I don't know. This is all exploratory. We'll keep exploring and seeing what we get. Okay, so let's talk about the monthly turn finally. Okay, I lied. One last thing on objectives before we move on. I am going to keep track of a list of proposed changes and/or errata. Um, Once I get to the end of this playthrough, I'll get those posted to Consim World and Board Game Geek. With the errata being focused on stuff that really isn't clear in the 3.0 rules but are intended. We need a 3.1 rules for some of that stuff just for clarity's sake. I'll need to post that no matter what, I think. And then my proposed changes around the objective system, which right now are, I think you ought to be able to place objective markers in cities and ports that do not have enemy units in them, as long as they're enemy controlled, so that you have something to shoot for that makes sense and is logical and is near to a goal that makes sense, I guess. Um, and uh, what's the other one? What I think the UN player should not be allowed to do is to remove an objective marker that was just placed in that victory phase. And what that means is, if there was a unit in Taegu and the North Korean player put an objective here because there was a unit present, let's say it's like that cadre here is sitting in the city, and he placed an objective marker, well, the rules as written, the UN player can just remove it. So it's like both players did nothing. I don't like. I don't think that's good. I think that just makes the game kind of stalled out. Like it just seems like such a weird thing. Like, okay, I place this, okay, I get rid of it, and I don't like that in games personally, where it's just -1 +1. What good does that do you in the game? And the UN player, I guess maybe it's a balance thing. The UN player can always do that. He can always remove one if it was placed on a here's the thing, because there's that requirement to place an objective marker where there is already a unit, the UN player can always just remove it, and that to me just seems really odd and a waste of players' time to even make that decision, right? If the communist player spends a bunch of time thinking about where they're going to put their objective, and then the UN player can just get rid of it, I mean that's silly. So my proposal would be that the UN player, they can choose to remove an objective marker, but it cannot be one that was just placed by the communist player that victory phase. So that, if the communist player says, hey, I'm going to go for this objective, the UN player has the opportunity to defend against that attack and remove it later. So there's actually some pressure between the players for something to happen, right? So if I say, hey, I'm putting an objective marker in Taegu, then that gives us the next turn for the communist player to try to take Taegu, for the UN player to defend Taegu and occupy, keep it occupied and garrisoned, and then when we get to the victory phase, remove that marker, basically. And I guess the only con of that being, well, what if the communist player puts another marker down? Well, that's where he's going to continue focusing. So you remove one, you remove the old one, and the new one's there, and maybe the new one, that you keep fighting around Tegu until the communist player maybe decides he doesn't want to go to Tegu anymore, and maybe you've placed your objective somewhere else, right? I don't know. I could see some cons to the idea that, oh, if you just place objective markers in whatever city, you can just pile them up. But again, you can already do that. So I don't know. I don't know, guys. Those are some proposed changes, and I'm interested to hear from the designer eventually, what he thinks of those changes and like why. I suspect some of these things may have already been explored in playtesting and in designing, and maybe there's something I don't know where I don't realize that matters here. But I do want to push on the system and see if see where it can go, if it can work out better. But okay, now for real, we're going to go do the monthly phase stuff. Okay, so looking at the monthly turn here as we enter August 1950, I've already taken care of most of the setup for this. I did roll weather, and it turns out this is our first rain weather month. So it is a rainy August, and that's going to affect air capability a little bit. So this will help the North Koreans, I think. The foreign intervention and foreign aid phase, there was nothing to do. The victory points are at flat 0. So no one is getting any additional foreign aid or intervention. The infrastructure and supply phase, we are taken care of there. The Allies or the UN has 9 supply, and the North Koreans will also have 9 supply as it happens, though that's probably going to end up changing for next month with all of our infrastructure bombing. We're probably going to try to do, or would have been trying to do. And let's see. Aircraft recovery and reinforcement phase. So the Allies ended up getting another airfield and another bomber plane. The North Koreans got a Chinese airfield, but they probably won't be using it very much. And then we're going to have aircraft repair phase. Well, I did that, and the communists failed to repair their damaged plane, so that's a bummer for them. And with the Air Force's commitment phase, what I was tripped up on, I'm not sure if this is the right decision. The communists are just going to keep their planes grounded for the moment. They would just get shot to crap anyway at this rate, so they didn't put anything in the air, and this allowed the UN player to kind of assign all their planes to other stuff, which is a tremendous advantage. And I guess, my opportunity cost here was that had I sent up our one lone plane to do something, then that might have incentivized these guys to do more than just, or I'm sorry, with these guys, they don't even need a fly top cover. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I'm getting it wrong. I'm confused. I'm sorry. I did actually assign the Communist Air Force the lone remaining plane to ground support, and so we might have tried to do something in Mig Alley, but he would have got shot to crap. I'm sorry. Which is why the UN has 2 planes assigned to top cover to intercept the communist ground strike or ground support. So, overwhelming force for the UN player, as to be expected with all the air stuff they have going, but overall not a huge deal for the UN to worry about. They're going to probably push aside a lot of this stuff. But yeah, there you go. So, yeah, Air Force commitment, all that, good to go. And we're going to start looking at the air support, which I have already set up for both sides. So communists get 4, the Allies get, the UN gets 12. I'm going to keep saying the Allies. I know it's wrong technically, but yeah. And then strategic air missions. So before we do the strategic air missions, I had not yet adjudicated those. I did want to point out that we had an additional reinforcement this turn, or this monthly turn, that is a new game mechanic, so worth calling out. We got MacArthur as a theater commander. So what does that do for us? Well, it changes a few things. There's some special rules around this. The communists can get a leader as well. They can get Peng Duhai. I probably butchered that name. I'm sorry. He comes in when the Chinese intervene, but otherwise the UN will have MacArthur, and eventually he will be replaced or potentially replaced by Ridgway. Uh, so, what are the mechanics of this? Well, the UN may bomb airfields and improved airfields in China. So, we would not have been able to do that without MacArthur, but now MacArthur is here, so we can go and do airstrikes on the specifically the airfields that are in the Chinese airfield box for the communists. Each victory point earned by the UN counts double when the communist player has victory points. So the communists currently do not have victory points, but if they did, basically it makes it easier for the UN player to come out of a victory point deficit and get into good shape for victory points. The UN player may not use victory points to satisfy combat losses. Okay, so this is really important. This means that the communists won't be able to get victory points for uh, combat alone. So communists are going to get victory points from objectives, one would assume at this point, because the UN player cannot give up victory points in combat while MacArthur is in lead, which means this actually could be a bad thing because in combat, they might have to take losses, and those losses are going to be replacements or retreats, and that could be actually pretty bad news for the UN forces. So in some ways, this is maybe a bad thing. And then MacArthur will go away, and he'll be replaced at the beginning of the next monthly phase. Whenever the next month starts, by Ridgway when the VP marker has been on its blue side, and the communists earn a victory point while he is in command. So basically, if we try to figure out what case that would be, this means that the Allies are able to beat up the communists. They get some victory points, which puts the marker on the blue side, meaning the UN is the side that has victory points and is thus the currently winning side. That's the first condition. Once that has happened, then we start looking for the second condition, which is the communists earn a victory point. So as soon as we get into the blue, which could happen this turn, that triggers one, and then if the communists are able to get victory points again via some mechanism, then MacArthur gets the boot. So I'm not sure what that'll look like because I think MacArthur was in command for quite a while before he was relieved of command and Ridgway took command. So I don't know if it could be just the way the game shakes out that MacArthur is our theater commander for a little bit and then he's gone, or he could be there for a while. It's really going to depend on when the communists are allowed to get victory points, I guess. And that it's just kind of weird. I'm not sure how that'll play out. I suspect that this will enable the UN to, they're going to push up the peninsula again. They're going to get some victory points one way or another. That'll satisfy the first condition. And then whenever the communists can push back, they can't get victory points in combat because the UN isn't allowed to give up victory points that way. So it'll have to happen via the communist player saying, hey, I'm going to get some victory points, and they get some from an objective marker or something, right? I guess that's how it would happen. Now, is it actually better to get Ridgway? Well, here's the rules, just so we're all clear. The UN player can activate a lot more units when they activate HQs with Ridgway, so that's better. You get a free elite unit during the monthly turn. And in every combat, the UN player draws 3 combat chits from the cup and chooses which one to use. It's almost like they have some of the surprise benefits all the time. All the time. So I think as a UN player, I would be happy to get rid of MacArthur as soon as possible. And I guess this puts a challenging thing out here, which is like, maybe the communists don't want to give the UN player any victory points because they want to keep that first condition from happening, and they want to keep MacArthur in because they'd rather have MacArthur in command than Ridgeway, probably, is what it feels like. But then that means they can't gain the victory points that they've been banking in Seoul, because those victory points are going to be a problem there. Or, right, here's all the decision making, guys. Because the marker has not yet hit the blue side, maybe the communists need to focus on not giving the blue player any victory points, and ensuring that the communists get all the victory points they can from those objective markers, and just keep MacArthur in the chair. That may mean we don't see Chinese intervention until much later, but maybe that's worth it. I don't know. That's the exploration that we're in the middle of right now. Okay, so next we're going to take care of the infrastructure bombing on the part of the Allies. So while it is rainy weather, they are still able to do some of these action. I just believe there is a penalty to the action. I just need to double check that. And yes, if the weather is rainy, it's a -1 to your aircraft's ability. So all the UN forces, all the planes are going to be a little bit worse off. A little bit worse off. And I that might be applicable for ground support as well. I might have to fix the charts a little bit to reflect that. But we'll take a look at that in just a second. Okay, having done a quick double check on the ground support stuff, it doesn't impact the support level. You do take the -1 for rainy weather when you're calculating the ground support levels for the combat itself. So not from where do you put the air support marker. And I think that air support marker, I mean, it doesn't do as much as you would think, but it is the basis by which you have the support readiness penalty applied to, and then that tells you, how many points you can use, and then you pick your planes based on that. So it is a little weird system there, but it works. Okay, so what are we going to do here? Well, there's no MiG alley stuff, so I think we're just going to do, I think we're just going to do infrastructure strikes. And so it's a -1. We have B-29s, 3 of them doing this, and a B-29 is a 4 value, -1 is 3. So we do need to roll, so we're going to roll a D6, and we want a 3 or less. So the first one of the 3, we got it. Second, ooh, okay, so first thing, I'll make sure that the first one gets resolved, so we lower the infrastructure of the communists by 1. But we rolled a 6. So what happens when we roll a 6? Place the attacking aircraft in the damaged aircraft box, but do not flip it to its reduced side, nor remove it from play if already flipped. Okay, so the second plane, which we'll say was this one, has to go into the damaged aircraft. So he failed badly enough that he actually got aborted out and needs to be serviced before it can return to action. And then we have the last one, and we'll roll the die. And happened again. Okay, so not as good, and this guy goes to available when done. Not as good of an infrastructure strike as last turn, where I think we hit almost every single one. This one, just bad luck. The rain made it hard to do stuff, and by golly, they had some disruption and had to go home. Then we have Airfield Strikes. We have a B-29 and I believe this is a B-26. It's kind of hard to read the print on the counter. Okay, so kind of the same thing. We're going to have a -1 to the value of the unit. So for the B-29, we'll roll. We need a 3. And I rolled another 6. So he's going in the damaged aircraft. What's going on, guys? I keep rolling 6s. That's crazy, man. That's crazy. Now we need to roll a 2 or less for this last guy. If I roll another 6, guys, on camera, I should be rolling a D&D character right now. Okay. So a 3 and a 3 is actually not enough because of the rain. So we actually fail. Um, we actually fail to bomb any Chinese airfields. We tried. We would have tried, but we failed. So much for that. Oh, that's funny. Oh man. Okay, and then that's it. There because the only side with planes in top cover is the UN. Those planes can stay there, and then they will have the ability to intercept communist ground support missions if the communists decide to fly them during the turn itself. So that is it for the monthly turn, all done and done. And now we will get into the first week of August 1950 and take care of all that usual stuff. I can tell you that the fleet is not going to be redeployed. There's not going to be an amphibious invasion. There is not going to be any sea evacuation. And in terms of reinforcements, I'm not sure we even really wanted to do anything there. Let me double check. Ah, okay. Um, so the South Korean airfield bot gets another. Sure, I get an airfield, improved airfield. We get another improved airfield in South Korea. Whoosh. That's significant. There you go. Another improved airfield in South Korea for the UN. And then we're going to add. Oh wow. Okay. Now this is all good stuff. It's all UN replacements. Artillery goes up by 1. Tank goes up by 1. The South Koreans get a replacement point. The US gets a replacement point. And add 2 infrastructure levels. So we go from 9 to 11. We don't get any additional supply for that, but we do get the infrastructure level. And that's it for reinforcements. The U.S. cannot do anything. The UN cannot put a new unit out of the dead pile because there's only one here. I think the communists will pay a replacement point to get a unit on the board. Get one unit out of the dead pile, and then the other unit in the replacements block goes to the destroyed pile. So a destroyed box. So yeah, so far the North Koreans have 2 units in the destroyed box, gone forever, and the allies, the UN has 2 as well, plus the task force if you want to count that. So yeah, both sides have been bloody, that's for sure, and you'll see the force pool start to deplete over time with those losses, but then there are still units that will come in as reinforcements. So there's sort of a in and out situation that is going to occur there. The next reinforcement turn for week 2 will be all communists, so the communists can at least be glad for some help there. Okay, and then we're going to have the UN communications and refresh phase and the communist strategic movement phase. So I'm going to go off camera. I'm going to check the communications, and I will do the UN refresh and flip all those counters. And then the communists will do their strategic movement, and we'll see where the game situation is from there. Okay, here are where things stand now that the UN refresh phase has occurred and the communist strategic movement phase has occurred. The one tricky thing I realized was that if you did a reserve move at the very last week, or I guess if you did a reserve move as the communists, they will not be fresh to do strategic movement or your own movement on the following turn. So we actually had this one guy here who could not move. He's spent, and there was no refresh phase in between when we did our reserve movement. Um, so before I do the communist activation phase, let's talk about what the communist wants to do in their turn, and I'll show you the aftermath, barring any weird situations where I really think I need to record a battle on camera or something. But we have one reinforcement that has strategically moved down to Pyongyang right here on this light bulb glare. That's as far as he can go. I may just keep him there, and he will remove UN objective markers at the end of the turn, or will pick up victory points as the communist. I'm not sure which. Quite yet. I'm not going to talk about objectives anymore because I will never stop talking about them. The rest of these guys were strategically moved down, so those are reinforcements from previous turns that are working their way down. And I'm trying to figure out like how, which roadways are they gonna take to be most effective. I've pulled back the HQs a little bit, and it kind of feels sad. Like, oh man, I'm a month ahead of schedule, and I'm already pulling back as the communist. But what I'm trying to do is figure out like how do we get ultimately, like how do we get in a good position um, defensively based on the road network. And here's the thing: I would love to counterpunch the U.S. forces and put them in a tough situation. And I could certainly do it. I think, when I look at the force composition on the map, had I not gotten stalled in Seoul early on, yeah, I could see us still way down here in the south pushing on the Pusan perimeter and it being a little bit tighter. But because I got delayed by some rough die rolls and everything else, we just didn't get down there in time to apply that pressure. And so the U.S. doesn't have enough, the UN, the U.S. and the South Koreans don't have enough force volume that they can try to like totally outflank me over here. But locally, they do have superiority of numbers, and I have to watch out for that. And I need to maintain a coherent line somehow. Like that's really the key thing. We need to maintain the coherent line somehow and figure out a way to continue to get victory points out of Seoul. That's really the tricky bit. What's funny is, as long as U.S. UN troops are not anywhere near Seoul, and while they still technically control this hex, the HQ is not a unit. If there are no enemy units within 3 hexes of the objective marker, we can claim it. So we're going to claim these victory points without even taking Seoul. Again, the rules allow me to do that. I'm going to claim. I don't even have to have units nearby. I happen to do have some over here, but I don't need them because I have surrounded that territory. There are no enemy units nearby. I can claim those victory points when we get to the end of the turn. Now, the whole idea was I was going to be able to take these, what was it, 6, 11 victory points, 12 victory points, 13 victory points, just via hanging out and watching things kind of unwind over the next several turns as I claim those victory points. That's what they want to do. So whether or not it's worth the foreign intervention to do that, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. It's tricky. I'm still like, this is all tricky. But if I think operationally for a second, the North Koreans need to create a coherent line. They need to hold critical road junctions. They need to let these reinforcements come up. And then when that is complete, they can look to do very narrow focused offensives to try to cut Americans out of supply and attack them in a focused effort and try to blunt the American advantage as much as possible. And because the Americans can't take victory points as losses, they are either going to have to retreat or they're going to have to lose replacements. And I think that is where the North Koreans have an opportunity here to beat up on the Americans and try to blunt their efforts. And with the rain, the air power is not as strong as it could be, and so maybe that's where our advantage lies as well. The only shame is right now the communists are just totally outclassed in terms of artillery and tank support, and that's something that we'll need to keep in mind as we operate here. So, okay, I'm going to go off camera. I'm going to start conducting North Korean activations. We will see where we get. We may not even attack at all. We may simply sort of get things a little better situated. It's really going to come down to how far I can get with what we've got. So, yeah, we'll be back. Okay, hey guys, I wanted to pause in my activities. I did one activation so far over here. Thanks to the roads, I had plenty of reach to activate units. I had pulled some guys back over here. I had pulled some guys forward from way up here. They were just in range. They were able to kind of come out a little bit more. And then I had one deliberate attack on this port. And I ended up doing a lot of die rolling. It might have been worth recording, but I'll describe what happened to you very quickly. The first thing was it was a deliberate attack. I thought about bringing another unit in for a bonus. It probably would have been worthwhile to do that, but I let the one lone guy try, which was foolish. So here's the thing. I believe because this guy is sitting adjacent to a UN supply source, he has a line of communication, no matter what, I think. I'm pretty certain. I think that's true, which means that the South Korean unit gets whatever support is feasible from the U.S. side, the UN side. Now, the communists, when they called for artillery support, the UN player said, nope, I am going to interdict that, failed to interdict, and actually failed to stay on station. So one of the UN units, the rain certainly helped, failed to interdict the artillery support and tracing the line of supply for artillery support, and had to go home. They didn't bother trying to block the tank support because the tank support wasn't going to provide as much help anyway, so the communists got that. We then had the communists try to use ground support, their one lone plane, and that led to an interception. The interception succeeded, where I rolled for one of the planes in the top cover box, managed to roll well enough that we did intercept the ground support, and that damaged the sole remaining communist plane, which is now flipped in the damaged aircraft box. And that unit failed to stay on station and went home. When it came to the actual combat, while the communists had a pretty fair amount of aid, the UN player just had so much more artillery, more tanks, and I allocated 3 planes for ground support. Now, they were able to enter the combat because we had 9 plane value to use, but when we actually provided support, the 9, because I was using 3 planes, each had 1 subtracted from their value because of the rainy weather, which still ended up being 6 total points of support. And in the terrain that we were fighting in, that ended up being another +6. So the die roll modifiers, which we wouldn't have known exactly how it all shook out, depending on interception and all of that, did wind up heavily in the UN's favor. And I rolled the dice. The communists rolled a natural 7. The UN rolled a natural 3. But that 3 was a +15 of the die roll. So they ended up with 18. The communists rolled a 7, and they had a +8. So it was a 15 to 18. The only hope that the communists might have had was if they had rolled this could have been so much worse for the communists, and it was still bad. We had 3 loss factors, so we took a replacement loss and we retreated 2 hexes. We didn't want to give the UN any victory points necessarily right now because we didn't want to trigger the MacArthur condition. So this guy is disrupted at the moment and got pushed back. So that was sort of our last-ditch effort to ideally do some damage over here, maybe knock this unit out and take the port, which have then given us a little bit more free reign to operate down in the south and maybe go down this road and outflank the Americans. Because we failed to do that, it's going to be a much harder time for the communists from here on out. I need a roll for the staying on station for the 3 ground units, so I'll do that quickly here. Staying on station, and finally, this guy's got to go home. Okay, so the UN only lost 1 plane out of that whole thing, and by lose, I mean go back to available. So they still have plenty of air power through the rest of the next couple of weeks. So far, anyway, we'll see that start to peter out a little bit. But okay, so now we're going to look to pay a supply point to reactivate this HQ, and the US is going to try to interdict that, I think, for sure. So they're going to make an attempt. They need a 3 or less, and we rolled a 6, which means I think that guy is actually damaged. Let me see how that's handled. Interdiction. Okay, he goes into the damaged aircraft. So the UN actually has had a number of damaged aircraft because of this, because of the infrastructure striking that failed. So all of that air isn't infinite. So we will get to spend a supply point, and we will restore this HQ. So it's not totally a grim situation for the communists. I mean, they definitely are hobbled by the UN air power, but they can still do stuff, and I think that's the important thing. Okay, so that was that whole HQ's activation and a refresh. There are still a few units around, but we'll have to decide what more we want to activate. We definitely have guys over here to activate. I need to probably save this guy because he's kind of in a bad situation now. That could see this guy spring forward and knock him out of supply. So we'll probably need to pull him back. So yeah, I'll keep doing activations, and we'll come back when something interesting happens. Okay, here we are after the activations. I ended up doing another action with that HQ and replenished it. The UN decided not to try to interdict because they don't have very many interdiction planes left for the rest of the month. And basically what the North Koreans have tried to do is just make sure that there's no obvious places where a lone North Korean unit is going to be in bad shape based on the roads. So again, just as a reminder, like when a unit is activated for a normal activation, basically what you want to watch out for is where you can go by road, and then once you're done with the roads, because you only have 5 movement points, like you really are going to move 1 or 2 hexes at best. And especially because there's still a lot of rough terrain through here, that costs 2. So if you're not moving through a road, like you're not going to get far. So there's not as much danger of a sole communist unit being totally cut off, assuming they're at the right road choke points. And I think kind of where we're situated is in pretty good shape. This guy over here has support. He's at a good kind of spot because it's going to be hard to cross all that rough and mountainous hill terrain to cut these guys off anyway, and they have the coast road to protect them. These guys are holding a junction. It's a little dangerous around here, but it's okay. And then back here, we need to kind of protect the junctions around Daejeon. So again, I feel bad. I'm a month early going on the defensive as the North Koreans, but that is just for this turn to ensure that when the UN goes, they can't just pick off another communist unit. We need to pull back, get reorganized, then we can start thinking about offensives, counteroffensives. But for the moment, we need to sort of get in some better shape, I guess. One other thing I should mention is when we did that retreat and disruption, we lost some of our artillery and tank support because of it. We lost 1 level each because it was a disruption, and when you have a disruption and you used artillery and tank support, again, this is errata that is not clearly defined in the 3.0 rules, but is how the game is supposed to work. We lost an artillery support level, and we lost a tank support level. So that's a bummer because we really don't get much in the way of replacements for that. The communists are going to be reliant on foreign aid to get any tanks replaced, and there might be a few more levels we'll get from reinforcements, but I don't think it's very many. So every tank support level lost hurts a lot. It's same for artillery, but tank especially. We're just going to have to deal with that. If we're fortunate enough to catch the U.S. forces in some bad combats, because they can't take victory points as losses, they're either going to lose units or they're going to lose to retreating, and that's where we could see the UN support levels start to drop, and that will be very important because they're going to get more reinforcements for sure. So any opportunities where we can see those units start to lose support would ultimately be valuable. So I think that's it for the communist player. So what I'll do next is I will take care of their line of communication and refresh phase, and we'll let the UN player act and see what they can cook up this turn. Okay, so here we are after the UN strategic movement phase. And you can kind of see like we are now filling out or defining our axes of advance, though we are a bit limited by where our UN HQ is, which is really going to be how the US cadres activate, right? So that's kind of our limiter. But the South Korean Corps has moved up. Really, the groupings are like, out here. So this guy's not totally by himself. He held out strong. Good job, buddy. Cavalry's here. And now the new front line is like so. We've got 1st Cav situated over here. A few South Korean forces kind of helping to drive up this way. Then we have the 24th Infantry, rather. Here, also backed up with South Koreans, so they're going to kind of push up this way. And then the intention is for the 25th Infantry to run along the coast. This guy is here protecting the flank at a town. That's right, a town. So maybe the communists put a objective marker there. I don't know, but they're on the. It seemed like they're on the strategic retreat, so maybe they don't bother to do that. So yeah, there you go. So each set of units kind of has a defined sector now. And really now same for the communists. So I'd say this is like the first turn before we even have real activations. We haven't done the actual real activations yet. This is probably the first real turn where you can see now there is a clear line, and there's a axis of advance and things kind of determined and a game plan executed on. And I will say again, the UN forces are ahead of schedule in being able to push back, it seems like, where they can probably get a 2-to-1 advantage on a lot of these units and get that plus. It's just a +1 some of the time for attack bonuses, but even that can help a lot. And I suspect the communists are going to be on the run after this activation. We'll see how far they get. But yeah, there you go. So we'll go ahead and start doing actions. The communists will be trying to keep in mind when do they do a reserve move, if at all, over the course of these actions. And that'll be an interesting thing to see just what occurs. Keeping in mind that if they do a reserve move during the UN activation, they're not going to get a refresh until after the next communist move. So if they're going to do it, it has to count a lot. And that is what's going into the thought process here across the board. Okay, see you guys after the UN activations. Okay, here we are after the first UN activation, and the communists sure got a wallop. Now, the cost was we had a number of our ground support planes have to go to the available box because they could not stay on station. So we are, essentially pretty low on plane capability. We did refresh for 2 supply points, but you can see we forced retreats and disruptions over here. We didn't activate over here yet. We'll probably do that with a second activation, honestly. It's pretty gnarly. I mean, to be honest, it is pretty gnarly. The communists have actually lost multiple tank levels and artillery levels. Their replacements are all the way down to 1, so very soon. I mean, they're using replacements to not have to retreat so much, but I mean, they're being put into disrupted states. They're trying to avoid full routes because that's going to be a nightmare to recover from. Um, it's a pretty rough situation. I'm not going to lie. Um, Now the only thing is now that uh, the UN forces are a little exhausted. You know, we're not going to be able to activate very many units here. But I think what we'll do is we'll activate again. And let's see. I think we want to activate this guy and just get him moved up like so. Not necessarily to attack, but just to get up there. I think we'll flip this guy and have him go 1.5, 2.5, like so. We would kind of knocked some stuff around because I bumped into the table, but activate him to go, let's see, 1, 1.5 plus 1, 2.5. 2.5. So that would leave us with a hasty attack, which I think now's the time we really push on them. So we'll pull a hasty attack marker out on this guy. He will have river defense, but we will see what happens there. And with these guys, I do think that would be 1.5 moved. He would move half, 2.5 moved. 1.5 would allow him to do a prepared attack. We'll have a prepared attack here, I think. It's in the mountains, or the hills rather, so that could pose a problem, but I think we're kind of stressing the Koreans out enough that we're going to push them past a breaking point potentially. So I'm going to take care of these attacks and we'll see what the end result is. So the map looks a little bit different than when I last left it. I had to account for a couple of things that I didn't before, at least not properly anyway. So there was a slight retreat over here, and then we blew these guys back quite a bit, trying to retreat units to avoid losing too much. So the North Koreans are out of replacements. We are disrupted and or routed across the board. And I forgot I should have been drawing snafu markers, and we haven't really done a whole lot of that up to this point, but I had to do a whole bunch of it. And so what I did is I went back to all the units that were disrupted or routed, and I drew from the snafu cup as if I were the UN player and applied the effect. So we end up with a lot of bad stuff on the board. This guy has an incompetent leader. This guy's out of fuel. This guy's out of fuel. This guy's out of ammo. This guy's has an incompetent leader. Oddly enough, the routed guy ended up not having any effect him, and he has an incompetent leader. What's all that mean? A player with an incompetent leader must offer his opponent the chance to re-roll his combat die once for each incompetent leader on his side of the combat. That's a nightmare. Out of fuel, gets no tank support no matter what, which they're not getting a whole lot of tank support these days anyway. Ammo out is no artillery. So that is a problem. That is a problem. Now, how do you get rid of snafu markers? That's a good question. Leaders are removed if the unit is eliminated and sent to the replacement box. That's a bummer. We can spend supply to get rid of our ammo shortages and our fuel shortages. Supply we do not have very much of, I might say. So this is going to be real bad for the North Koreans. This was a very rough turn. They did not want to give up any victory points, but in the process, they've made their line very brittle, very weak and brittle. And the UN forces are pretty stoked and happy about that. And all this in just the first week of the turn. So things are in pretty gnarly shape. And I suspect that the North Koreans are going to continue a retreat. But I think that'll be it for the UN activations. Again, pretty darn gnarly across the board anyhow. So what are we going to do next? Well, we're going to eliminate friendly units. I don't see a reason to do that for anyone, and we'll do the victory phase. So what do we want to do? Well, here's an interesting thing. I think the communists are going to pull off and claim a victory point marker. So they'll do that in Seoul, and they're going to get 5 victory points for it. The UN player, uncertain of the best thing to do, actually sees an opportunity. The first time all game, we actually see something that does make sense in the context of the game. They are going to put a make sure I pick my skin randomly. They're going to put a UN objective marker in Daejeon, I guess. It's a city that's under communist control. It's nearby. I think that's a legal move here. Double check. Enemy controlled. Yeah, enemy unit in it, and it's a city. We can place it. So there you go, guys. We have perhaps placed our first real intentionally making sense objective marker for the game. And we'll see if the UN can take it, capture it, do the thing. I suspect that they will. Now, keep in mind, even if they take Daejeon, they will need to leave a unit behind during the end turn phase of the next turn to reveal it so that it can be claimed 2 turns from now. So again, even when you pick up that objective or you take the hex, you have to leave somebody adjacent to it so that they can reveal it. Then you can move on, and then you can just pick it off the map as long as there aren't any communist forces nearby. So we're going to look to clear the area around Daejeon, and that will pick up some victory points for the UN forces, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to move on to turn 7, but I think I'll call it a video here because we've been yapping a whole lot about a whole lot of stuff. The UN has used up a lot of their air this week. A lot of their air, so I guess for the next 3 weeks you won't see a lot of air stuff, but I think we've sufficiently bombed the crap out of the North Korean forces that they may not need that air support, and they can just leverage artillery and tank support and wallop them real good. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed turn 6. We will look at turn 7 in the next video, which will be week 2 of August 1950. Take care. Keep on gaming.